The Tudor era, with its glittering courts and fierce power struggles, is often remembered for kings and queens wielding swords and crowns. But beneath the surface of political intrigue lies a world shaped equally by the raw, vulnerable force of love. From passionate romances that defied royal expectations to secret affairs that sparked deadly consequences, the Tudors' love stories are as gripping as any battlefield drama. These tales are not just about history's famous rulers. They are about the very human desires, heartbreaks, and sacrifices that defined an age where love and power were inextricably linked, and where a single choice of the heart could change the course of a nation. Between 1485 and 1603, the Tudor dynasty ruled England through a time of extraordinary transformation. It was an era of political power struggles, religious upheaval, artistic flourishing, and immense personal drama. At its core, however, lay a paradox that defined the lives of many who lived at court. Love and marriage, often thought of as private matters of the heart, were inextricably entangled with power, duty, and survival. For the Tudors, kings, queens, consorts, and courtiers, love was never simple. It could elevate a person to the heights of glory or drag them to the scaffold. Within this dangerous and glittering world, some of the most heartbreaking love stories in English history unfolded. The Tudor family began with Henry VII, who seized the crown at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, ending the Wars of the Roses. His marriage to Elizabeth of York united the warring houses of Lancaster and York and set the stage for over a century of Tudor rule. What followed was a period marked by turbulent reigns, especially those of Henry VIII and his children, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I. While history often remembers this era for its dramatic political events and religious reformations, the human stories behind those transformations are equally compelling. At the heart of many were complex, emotionally charged relationships shaped by the crushing expectations of royalty. In the Tudor world, love was rarely a matter of free will. Marriages were instruments of diplomacy, and romantic attachments carried life-and-death stakes. Monarchs and noble families sought strategic unions that could solidify alliances, prevent rebellions, and produce heirs. Love was subordinate to lineage, loyalty, and legacy. Yet within this rigid framework, the human heart could not be fully contained. People fell in love with those they should not have. They defied expectations, acted on forbidden desires, and suffered deeply for it. The tension between duty and desire produced some of the most tragic narratives of the time. For Tudor women especially, love could be fatal. The stakes were often highest for them. A queen consort who failed to bear a male heir could quickly fall from favor. A courtier's flirtation could be reinterpreted as treason. A noblewoman's secret affair could end in disgrace or death. Even for the monarchs themselves, love posed a unique threat. It could weaken their political standing, provoke factionalism, or endanger the stability of the realm. Emotional vulnerability, when exposed, was often weaponized. Henry VIII's reign alone illustrates this vividly. His 6 marriages were not just episodes of personal drama, they had national consequences. His obsession with and Boleyn tore England from the Roman Catholic Church. His abandonment of Catherine of Aragon, once deeply loved, sparked international condemnation and internal unrest. Later, the youthful infatuation between his 5th wife, Catherine Howard, and the handsome courtier Thomas Culpeper ended with both of them losing their heads. These were not mere love affairs. They were catastrophes that reshaped the course of history. But even outside the throne room, the pain of Tudor love was palpable. Consider Lady Jane Grey, the so-called 9 Days Queen, and her husband, Lord Guilford Dudley. Teenagers caught in a web of dynastic ambition. They were married off and used as pawns in a failed political coup. Their brief union, perhaps full of untapped affection, ended in execution. Or take Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's sister, who risked everything to marry the man she loved, Charles Brandon. Though their union was genuine, it incurred royal wrath and lifelong consequences. For others, like Elizabeth I and Robert Dudley, love was never allowed to blossom fully. Though their bond endured for decades, the crown always came first. She remained the Virgin Queen, sacrificing personal happiness for the throne's stability. Love in the Tudor world was not only limited by politics but also shaped by religion. The Reformation, sparked by Henry's break with Rome, ushered in decades of religious turmoil that complicated personal choices. A person's faith could make them a target for persecution, or a prize in the marital marketplace. Religious loyalty often dictated who one could or could not marry. A Catholic princess might be married off to reinforce alliances with Spain or France, while a Protestant nobleman's union with a royal relative might be viewed with suspicion or even as heretical. The spiritual became deeply entangled with the sensual, and personal convictions could clash violently with the demands of the crown. Beyond religious and political forces, there was also the ever-present specter of surveillance. Life at the Tudor court was governed by intrigue, gossip, and betrayal. Nothing stayed secret for long. Courtiers spied on one another. Informants were everywhere. Letters were intercepted, private words could be reported, and jealous rivals could fabricate or expose scandals with devastating effect. Love, especially illicit love, required secrecy. But in a court as watchful as the Tudor court, privacy was a luxury few could afford. Many love stories ended not in happy unions, but in public disgrace or brutal executions. What makes a love story from this period heartbreaking is not simply that it ended in loss. It is that the people involved were often caught between impossible choices. To follow their hearts meant betraying their families, their countries, or their faiths. To deny their emotions meant living with lifelong regret, loneliness, or political calculation. These were not stories of ordinary relationships. They were magnified by the context in which they occurred. When a Tudor fell in love, it was not just romantic. It could be revolutionary. It could be dangerous. It could be fatal. And yet, amidst the darkness, there were glimmers of hope, devotion, and courage. Some couples found ways to love despite the odds, even if briefly. Others died expressing their loyalty and affection in final letters or quiet acts of bravery. Some left behind poems, portraits, or whispered memories that hint at the depth of their feelings. Their stories endure because they reveal the most intimate side of an otherwise brutal age. In an era defined by control, love was one of the few forces that could not be fully mastered. These stories, drawn from letters, chronicles, trial records, and contemporary accounts, do more than entertain. They illuminate the human cost of power. They remind us that even in a world where love was dangerous, people still yearned, still risked, still loved. That is what makes the love stories of the Tudors so compelling and so heartbreaking. Few love stories in history have had as far-reaching consequences or as devastating an ending as that of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. What began as a passionate, all-consuming attraction between a powerful king and a spirited court lady quickly escalated into a national crisis, severing England from the Catholic Church, appending centuries of religious tradition, and setting in motion the English Reformation. Yet behind the grand historical shifts lies a deeply personal tale, one of desire, ambition, manipulation, and betrayal. It is the story of a man who could not be denied, a woman who dared to aspire beyond her station, and a relationship that collapsed under the weight of the very forces it had unleashed. Henry VIII was not a man accustomed to rejection. As the second Tudor monarch, he had inherited not only the throne, but also a powerful sense of entitlement. Tall, athletic, charming, and intelligent in his youth, Henry was the embodiment of the Renaissance prince. Learned in theology, passionate about music and jousting, and consumed with the idea of legacy. Yet beneath the golden surface was a darker current. An impulsive, often ruthless man driven by a fierce need for control and dynastic continuity. His obsession with securing a male heir was born of both personal insecurity and political necessity. The stability of the Tudor dynasty, only recently established by his father Henry VII, depended on the production of a male successor. His wife of nearly 2 decades, Catherine of Aragon, had failed to give him that heir. Into this charged atmosphere stepped Anne Boleyn, and was unlike the women Henry had previously pursued. Educated in the refined courts of the Netherlands and France, she was witty, stylish, and opinionated. Unlike her sister Mary, who had been one of Henry's mistresses, and refused to become another conquest. She made it clear from the start that she would not surrender to the king's desires unless he made her his wife. This resistance both frustrated and captivated Henry. In Anne, he found not just beauty and grace, but an intellectual partner and a challenge. A woman who could match him in conversation, who read religious tracts, debated court policy, and possessed a keen political instinct. She offered something Catherine no longer could, the promise of youth, vitality, and crucially, fertility. Their courtship was anything but private. Over the course of nearly 7 years, Henry bombarded Anne with letters, gifts, and declarations of undying love. These letters survive to this day, offering rare insight into a king unguarded, emotionally exposed, and nearly desperate. He wrote of her sweet heart, her kindness, and his sleepless nights thinking of her. Yet this affection was never simple. Behind every word was the looming shadow of politics. Henry had to find a way to set aside his marriage to Catherine, a process that would prove legally and spiritually complex. The Pope refused to annul the marriage, prompting Henry to do the unthinkable: break from the Catholic Church, declare himself the supreme head of the Church of England, and push through a divorce by force of his own authority. And for her part, was not merely a passive object of desire. She knew the risks she was taking. As she navigated her sudden rise to prominence, she accrued both admiration and enemies. Some saw her as a Protestant heroine, others as a seductress usurping a rightful queen. She walked a perilous tightrope, using charm, wit, and calculated distance to maintain her hold on the king. But ambition alone does not explain her actions. There is evidence that Anne truly believed she could be a great queen, that she could give Henry the son he craved, support the reform of the church, and establish a new kind of monarchy grounded in moral strength and personal piety. In 1533, their long courtship culminated in a secret wedding, followed by Anne's lavish coronation. She was already pregnant. The stakes had never been higher. The child was expected to be a boy, the long-awaited heir. But when Anne gave birth to a daughter, the future Elizabeth I, the disappointment was immense. Though Henry publicly maintained hope, cracks in their relationship began to show almost immediately. Anne suffered at least 2, possibly 3 miscarriages over the next 2 years, one of them reportedly a male child. Each loss deepened Henry's frustration and reopened his old fears of divine disfavor. Where once he had seen Anne as the solution to his problems, he now began to view her as the source. Anne, too, was changing. No longer the mysterious object of pursuit, she was now a queen under constant scrutiny. Her sharp tongue and assertive manner, once alluring, now provoked resentment at court. She clashed with powerful factions, including those loyal to the Pope and supporters of Catherine and her daughter Mary. Henry, meanwhile, began to drift emotionally and physically from Anne. He took new mistresses, and his eye eventually settled on Jane Seymour, a lady-in-waiting who offered the same virtues Anne once had: purity, modesty, and the tantalizing promise of an heir. With Jane quietly waiting in the wings, Anne's position grew more precarious. What followed was a rapid, chilling descent into tragedy. In early 1536, Anne suffered another miscarriage. Henry, increasingly distant, began listening to advisers who claimed the queen had been unfaithful. Whether he truly believed these accusations is unclear. What is certain is that he allowed them to take root. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister, orchestrated an investigation that produced a series of lurid and implausible charges: adultery, incest, and treason. Several men close to Anne, including her brother George Boleyn and court musician Mark Smeaton, were arrested and tortured. Forced confessions were extracted, and a series of trials ensued, perfunctory, politically driven, and stacked against the accused. Anne's trial was held at the Tower of London. She defended herself with eloquence and courage, denying all charges. But the outcome was predetermined. She was convicted and sentenced to death. On May 19, 1536, dressed in a gown of grey damask and a crimson kirtle, Anne Boleyn was executed by a French swordsman specially brought in to ensure a swift death. Her final words were a prayer for the king and a declaration of innocence. She died with dignity, beheaded at the age of approximately 35. Was it love or merely lust that had led to Anne's rise and fall? That question has haunted historians for centuries. Henry's passion for Anne was real, intense, and transformative. It drove him to reject papal authority and reorder the religious structure of his kingdom. Yet the same passion, once soured, turned to contempt with astonishing speed. What had been adoration became suspicion. The woman he once called the one true love of my life became a traitor in his eyes. For Anne, her ambition had brought her to the highest point any woman at court could aspire to, yet it cost her everything. She gambled on love, on fertility, and on the king's favor, and lost. In the years that followed, Henry rarely spoke of Anne. He moved quickly to marry Jane Seymour, who would die giving birth to his only legitimate son. But Anne's legacy did not vanish. The daughter she bore, Elizabeth, would one day become one of England's greatest monarchs, ruling for 45 years with a brilliance and steadiness her parents had never achieved. Anne's bloodline shaped the course of English history, and her tragic end served as a chilling reminder of the danger that came with loving a king like Henry VIII. Their story endures because it represents the collision of personal emotion and political force at its most volatile. It is a cautionary tale about the risks of ambition, the cruelty of absolute power, and the fragility of favor in a court where lives could be remade or destroyed with a word. In a sense, Henry and Anne's love affair was never just about them. It was about a kingdom in flux, about the transformation of religion, identity, and monarchy. And yet, within all of that, there is still the heartbreaking image of a woman who loved too boldly, a man who desired too fiercely, and a love that devoured everything in its path. Their relationship did not just end in personal tragedy. It altered the entire trajectory of the English nation. The break from Rome, the rise of Protestantism, the executions, and the ripple effects that reached into the reign of their daughter all began with Henry's obsession for Anne. It is rare in history for a love story to have such seismic consequences. Yet it is this combination, the personal and the political, the emotional and the historical, that makes their story so compelling and so endlessly retold. Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn's love was not pure, not enduring, and not kind. But it was transformative. And in its unraveling, it revealed the terrifying power of unchecked desire, the vulnerability of ambition, and the high cost of loving a Tudor king. Catherine of Aragon's life was defined by love, loyalty, and loss. Born into Spanish royalty as the youngest daughter of Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, she was destined from childhood to play a pivotal role on the European stage. Her marriage to Henry VIII, the young, charismatic King of England, seemed to fulfill that promise. Their union began with hope and mutual respect, and for many years, it was marked by genuine affection. Yet it ended in humiliation and heartbreak, a tragedy made all the more painful by the depth of the emotional investment Catherine had in both her husband and her adopted country. Her story is not just one of a queen cast aside, but of a woman whose dignity, faith, and constancy endured even as her world collapsed around her. Catherine arrived in England as a teenager, originally betrothed to Henry's elder brother, Arthur. Their marriage, celebrated with great pomp, was meant to solidify the alliance between England and Spain. But tragedy struck quickly. Just a few months after their wedding, Arthur died suddenly, leaving Catherine a widow at 15. Her future hung in the balance. The Spanish and English courts debated her dowry, her virginity, and whether she should be married to Henry, the new heir. For years, Catherine remained in a kind of diplomatic limbo, living in increasingly straitened circumstances, uncertain whether her betrothal would be honored. Yet throughout this period, she remained composed and devout, earning the admiration of many in England. When Henry finally came to the throne in 1509, he chose to marry Catherine. Their wedding was a joyful occasion, and the early years of their marriage were filled with companionship and shared aspirations. Henry was young, handsome, and brimming with ambition. Catherine was graceful, intelligent, and deeply religious. Together, they appeared as the ideal Renaissance monarchs. Henry respected Catherine's intellect. She was a strong supporter of humanist education and had studied Latin, philosophy, and theology. At times, she even acted as regent in his absence, successfully rallying English troops during Henry's campaign in France. For over a decade, theirs was a stable and affectionate marriage. But beneath the public harmony, a private sorrow grew. Catherine bore Henry several children, but only one survived infancy, their daughter Mary. The rest, multiple stillbirths, infant deaths, and miscarriages, cast a shadow over the royal household. The pressure to produce a male heir was immense. Henry, though initially supportive, grew increasingly anxious and frustrated. The Tudor dynasty was still young and vulnerable. Without a male successor, the realm might descend once more into civil war. As Catherine aged and the likelihood of another pregnancy diminished, Henry began to see their marriage not as a partnership, but as an obstacle. Catherine's inability to give Henry a son became a source of deep personal anguish. In a society where a woman's worth was often measured by her fertility, Catherine must have felt her own sense of failure acutely. Yet she never blamed Henry or expressed bitterness. Her faith taught her to accept suffering as a test of character, and she bore her grief with remarkable stoicism. Still, it was clear that her role as queen was increasingly precarious. Court observers noted Henry's waning interest in his wife and his growing flirtations with other women. Catherine, always devout, turned increasingly to prayer and acts of charity, seeking solace in her religion as her marital bond eroded. When Anne Boleyn appeared at court, the balance tipped irreversibly. Unlike Henry's previous mistresses, and refused to be seduced into a brief affair. She demanded a crown. Henry, captivated by Anne's wit, style, and apparent fertility, began to believe that he could still have the male heir he so desperately needed, but only if he could rid himself of Catherine. Thus began the long and painful campaign for an annulment, one of the most controversial and consequential decisions in English history. Henry argued that his marriage to Catherine had never been valid because she had been his brother's wife. Though Catherine insisted that her union with Arthur had never been consummated, and provided ample evidence to support this claim, Henry was determined to obtain the Pope's approval for annulment. Catherine fought with quiet but unyielding determination. She refused to step aside or enter a convent. She maintained, to the end of her life, that she was Henry's true and lawful wife, and that Mary was his legitimate heir. Her refusal to yield became a moral and political stand that won her widespread sympathy across England and Europe. Even when publicly humiliated, separated from court, and increasingly isolated, she held her ground with grace and dignity. Henry, unable to persuade the Pope to grant the annulment, took matters into his own hands. With the help of his advisor Thomas Cromwell, he declared himself supreme head of the Church of England and annulled the marriage. The consequences were seismic. England was cut off from the authority of Rome. A new Protestant church was formed, and Catherine was formally removed from her position as queen. She was forced to live in remote castles, forbidden from seeing her daughter, and denied access to many of her former attendants. Her health declined rapidly, likely worsened by stress, grief, and inadequate living conditions. Yet even in exile, she remained steadfast in her identity. She continued to sign letters as Queen of England, refused to acknowledge Boleyn's legitimacy, and prayed daily for Henry, whom she insisted she still loved. Catherine's exile was one of the most painful aspects of her downfall. She had once been the most powerful woman in England, a queen beloved by many for her piety and charitable works. Now she lived in near seclusion, cut off from political life and separated from her daughter, the one child she had longed to protect and guide. Mary, too, suffered from her mother's disgrace. Declared illegitimate, removed from the line of succession, and forced to serve in the household of her infant half-sister Elizabeth, Mary endured a childhood shaped by her parents' bitter conflict. Catherine's final years were marked by declining health and a steady erosion of her physical world. But her inner strength never faltered. In January 1536, Catherine died at Kimbolton Castle. Her death was met with mixed reactions. To her supporters, it marked the passing of a true queen and a symbol of unwavering virtue. To her enemies, it cleared the path for Anne Boleyn and Henry's religious reforms. Yet Catherine's legacy could not be so easily dismissed. Her final letter to Henry, written on her deathbed, remains one of the most poignant documents in English history. In it, she forgave him. She expressed her enduring love and asked only that he look after their daughter. "Mine eyes desire you above all things," she wrote, words that have echoed through the centuries as a testament to her devotion. That letter, so tender and unselfish, stands in stark contrast to the cruelty she endured. It reveals the emotional complexity of her relationship with Henry, a man she loved deeply, supported faithfully, and never ceased to pray for, even as he dismantled her life piece by piece. Catherine's heartbreak did not harden her. Instead, it deepened her humanity. She became, in many ways, a martyr to love, faith, and conscience. Her story is one of endurance rather than resistance, of loss met with unwavering grace. Henry, for all his power, never entirely escaped the shadow of Catherine. Though he married 5 more times after her death, none of his queens matched her stature or loyalty. His only son, Edward VI, died young. Mary, Catherine's daughter, would eventually take the throne, becoming England's first queen regnant. In her mother's memory, she restored Catholicism and sought to undo the religious changes Henry had made. Though her reign was troubled, it fulfilled Catherine's dearest wish, to see her daughter rule as queen. The love between Henry and Catherine was real. For years, they were affectionate partners, bound by mutual respect and shared dreams. But love in the Tudor court was rarely enough. It had to contend with politics, power, fertility, and faith. In the end, Henry chose ambition over affection. Yet Catherine remained, until her final breath, a woman of principle, holding to her marriage vows and her beliefs with unshakable conviction. Her story is not merely a chapter in the larger narrative of Henry VIII's reign. It is a deeply personal tragedy, one that speaks to the pain of betrayal, the isolation of lost status, and the enduring strength of love that asks nothing in return. Catherine of Aragon's fall was not the result of scandal or weakness, but of a queen's refusal to be erased, a wife's refusal to stop loving, and a woman's determination to die as she had lived, with honor. Catherine Parr's place in history is often remembered as the sixth wife of Henry VIII, the woman who survived, where others had been divorced, beheaded, or otherwise destroyed. But survival is never as simple as it sounds, and in Catherine's case, it came at a heavy cost. A deeply intelligent and pious woman, she married the aging king not out of passion but out of duty, possibly even fear. Yet it was after Henry's death, in the brief window of her final years, that Catherine truly followed her heart. Her love for Thomas Seymour, brother to the Lord Protector and uncle to King Edward VI, was a chance for happiness she had long been denied. But what unfolded was not a fairy tale romance. It was a tragic entanglement shaped by secrecy, ambition, lust, and betrayal, a reminder that even love found late in life can come at the highest price. Catherine Parr had already been twice widowed before she became queen. She had not sought the crown but accepted it with a sense of duty and careful calculation. When Henry VIII proposed marriage in 1543, she could hardly refuse. He was still powerful, still dangerous, and still haunted by the fates of his previous wives. Catherine knew what was expected of her: obedience, loyalty, and the ability to navigate a treacherous court. And she succeeded. Her marriage to Henry was characterized not by passion, but by diplomacy. She managed the royal children's education, published religious texts under her own name, and avoided the deadly traps of court politics barely. At one point, her reformist religious views almost led to her arrest. Only her quick wits and humble submission saved her. Yet all the while, beneath the layers of duty and restraint, her heart belonged to another. Thomas Seymour had once courted her before Henry intervened. Younger, more dashing, and far more charismatic than the aging king, Seymour embodied the romantic ideal that Catherine's position as queen had forced her to abandon. When Henry died in 1547, Catherine was finally free to pursue a life of her choosing. She and Seymour quickly rekindled their relationship and, within months, married in secret. It was a risky move. Seymour's brother, Edward Seymour, was the Lord Protector of the young King Edward VI and effectively the most powerful man in the kingdom. A secret union between Catherine and Thomas threatened to destabilize the delicate balance of power. The marriage was not just scandalous because of its secrecy. It suggested ambition, perhaps even a calculated play for influence over the young king. Catherine was the Dowager Queen, still widely respected, and Seymour was uncle to the monarch. Together, they formed a potent political pair. But the rushed, clandestine nature of their union raised suspicions. When the marriage was revealed, it caused a minor political crisis. Many at court were outraged, including Princess Mary, Henry's Catholic daughter, who saw the marriage as indecorous. The council expressed anger over not being consulted. Even young Edward was said to be disappointed that his beloved stepmother had remarried so quickly. Catherine, however, was undeterred. For once, she had followed her own desires rather than being used as a pawn in someone else's game. She retired to Chelsea with Seymour, gathered her household around her, and seemed ready to enjoy a more private, peaceful existence. She even took into her care the adolescent Princess Elizabeth, Henry's daughter by Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth had been close to Catherine for years, and their bond was genuine. Catherine treated her like a daughter, guiding her education and protecting her from court intrigues. Yet it was within this seemingly domestic haven that the seeds of tragedy began to sprout. Catherine soon became pregnant for the first time in her life. At age 35, she was older than most first-time mothers in her era. It was a delicate condition, but she was overjoyed. At last, she would experience the motherhood she had so long been denied. But even as she prepared for the arrival of her child, her household was being disrupted by the behavior of her husband. Thomas Seymour, restless, ambitious, and perhaps incapable of real discretion, began paying inappropriate attention to the young Elizabeth. His actions were disturbing even by the looser standards of the Tudor court. He would enter Elizabeth's room in his nightshirt, engage in horseplay, tickle her, and behave in ways that alarmed Catherine's ladies-in-waiting. At first, Catherine seems to have downplayed the situation, perhaps unwilling to believe that the man she loved could behave so inappropriately. She even occasionally participated in these morning visits, perhaps trying to make light of what others saw as disturbing. But over time, the evidence mounted. Elizabeth was sent away, ostensibly for her own protection, and their relationship never quite recovered. Catherine's heartbreak must have been profound, torn between the daughter figure she loved and the husband she had risked everything to marry. Meanwhile, Seymour continued his political maneuvers. He was never satisfied with his brother's position as Lord Protector and sought greater influence over Edward VI. He pushed for more authority, hinted at marrying Elizabeth should Catherine die, and even tried to gain direct access to the king without his brother's consent. His ambition grew reckless, his judgment erratic. Catherine, increasingly isolated and now heavily pregnant, was caught in the middle of a man whose desires knew no boundaries. In the summer of 1548, Catherine gave birth to a daughter, named Mary after her own mother. It should have been a moment of triumph and joy. But almost immediately after the birth, she fell ill. She had contracted puerperal fever, a common and often fatal complication in an age without effective hygiene or antibiotics. Her condition worsened rapidly. Fevered, delirious, and racked with pain, she turned on Seymour in her final hours. According to eyewitnesses, she accused him of poisoning her, of abandoning her, of caring more for his own advancement than for her well-being. Whether these accusations had any basis in truth or were the ramblings of a woman in agony, they reveal the emotional storm that surrounded her final days. Catherine died on September 5, 1548. Her passing was a quiet end to a life spent balancing duty and desire, faith and personal longing. She had endured more than most. For marriages, years of political stress, the pressures of the Tudor court, and finally, the heartbreak of betrayal and a death that came just when she had glimpsed a new kind of happiness. Her infant daughter, Mary Seymour, was left in uncertain circumstances. Though some efforts were made to secure her future, she disappeared from the historical record after her second birthday. It is likely she died young, another tragic thread in this sorrowful tale. Thomas Seymour's downfall was swift. Without Catherine's stabilizing presence, his erratic behavior spiraled into recklessness. He continued to scheme, even attempting to break into the king's chambers at Hampton Court to rescue the boy from his brother's influence. He was arrested and charged with treason. The same charm and audacity that had once made him attractive now appeared dangerous. He was executed in March 1549, just months after Catherine's death. His ambition had consumed him, leaving behind a legacy of scandal, suspicion, and destruction. Elizabeth, who would one day become one of England's greatest monarchs, was deeply affected by these events. Her time in Catherine Parr's household had been formative, educationally, emotionally, and politically. The scandal with Seymour haunted her for years. She was subjected to interrogations, suspicion, and gossip. But she learned valuable lessons about trust, about discretion, and about the cost of allowing emotion to cloud judgment. These lessons shaped her approach to power, love, and marriage in the decades to come. Catherine Parr's story, particularly her final chapter, is a haunting blend of second chances and irreversible consequences. It is the tale of a woman who endured a loveless royal marriage with grace, only to find love too late. Her marriage to Seymour was built on hope, a hope for companionship, family, and fulfillment. But the very qualities that made Seymour attractive, his boldness, his ambition, also made him dangerous. Catherine saw in him a way to reclaim the life she had never fully lived. But in doing so, she stepped into a whirlwind of scandal and sorrow. There was real love in their marriage, or at least Catherine believed there was. She risked everything for it, her reputation, her political capital, and ultimately her life. But love in the Tudor world was rarely uncomplicated. It was shaped by ambition, entangled with power, and vulnerable to betrayal. Catherine Parr may have survived Henry VIII, but she could not survive the dangerous freedom that came after him. Her legacy is often overshadowed by the more dramatic stories of Henry's other wives, yet hers may be the most deeply human. She was not executed, not abandoned, not divorced. She chose to love again, believing, perhaps naively, that after all she had endured, she deserved happiness. Her story reminds us that heartbreak does not always come from betrayal alone. It can also come from hope, from the belief that love can heal, restore, and redeem. In the end, Catherine Parr's second chance became her final undoing. A survivor in every other chapter of her life, she fell not to a tyrant king, but to the treacherous promises of love unguarded. And in that, her story may be the most heartbreaking of all. Queen Elizabeth I and Robert Dudley shared a profound and enduring bond that spanned decades, marked by deep affection, political intrigue, and personal sacrifice. Their relationship, rooted in childhood friendship, evolved into a complex connection that defied the conventions of their time. Elizabeth and Dudley's connection began in their youth, both being children of prominent families in the Tudor court. This early association laid the foundation for a lifelong companionship. When Elizabeth ascended to the throne in 1558, she appointed Dudley as her Master of the Horse, a position that granted him close access to the Queen. Their frequent interactions fueled rumors of a romantic relationship, with many at court speculating about the nature of their bond. The situation became more controversial following the mysterious death of Dudley's wife, Amy Robsart, in 1560. She was found dead at the foot of a staircase, and while the coroner's report concluded it was an accident, suspicions of foul play persisted. The scandal surrounding her death made the prospect of Elizabeth marrying Dudley politically untenable, as it would have cast a shadow over her reign and legitimacy. Despite the scandal, Elizabeth and Dudley remained close. Elizabeth's choice to remain unmarried, earning her the title the Virgin Queen, was influenced by various factors, including political strategy and personal autonomy. Marrying Dudley, or any suitor, could have compromised her authority and subjected her to the influence of a husband, which she was determined to avoid. Court gossip and political opposition further complicated their relationship. Key figures like William Cecil viewed Dudley as a destabilizing force, fearing his rise might provoke civil unrest or foreign intervention. Elizabeth's favoritism towards Dudley alienated him from conservative factions, limiting his political maneuverability. The Queen's decision to prioritize her crown over personal desires led to a poignant sacrifice. Elizabeth's commitment to her role required her to suppress personal feelings, including her affection for Dudley. This choice underscored the theme of duty over desire, a recurring motif in her reign. Dudley's death in 1588 was a significant blow to Elizabeth. His passing marked the end of a deeply personal chapter in her life. Elizabeth reportedly kept his final letter in a treasure box by her bedside until her own death, a testament to the enduring impact he had on her. Their story is emblematic of the intricate interplay between personal affection and political exigency. Elizabeth and Dudley's relationship, while never culminating in marriage, exemplifies a profound connection constrained by the demands of leadership and societal expectations. Their bond remains a poignant narrative of love, sacrifice, and the complexities of power. Mary Tudor, the first reigning Queen of England in her own right, ascended to the throne in 1553 amid turmoil and opposition. Daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, Mary had endured years of emotional hardship and political marginalization following her mother's divorce and the Protestant Reformation initiated by her father. When she finally came to power at the age of 37, she did so not only with the intent to restore the Catholic faith to England, but also with personal dreams long deferred, of love, of marriage, and above all, of children. The weight of securing a Catholic succession for the Tudor line weighed heavily on her. But these dreams would not bring her joy. Instead, they would leave her broken. Her union with Philip of Spain, far from being a fairy tale romance, became one of the most poignant stories of unrequited love in Tudor history. A tragic tale of longing, political alliance, and deep personal sorrow. For Mary, marriage was never simply about politics. It was personal. She had witnessed the disintegration of her parents' marriage, lived through the disgrace of being declared illegitimate, and felt the sting of emotional abandonment by her father. These early wounds never truly healed. Throughout her life, she had yearned for affection, stability, and a husband who would provide both companionship and legitimacy to her rule. When she became queen, she viewed marriage not only as a duty to the realm, but as a chance for happiness and redemption. Philip of Spain, son of the powerful Emperor Charles V and future ruler of the vast Spanish Empire, seemed on paper a perfect match. The marriage was orchestrated more by politics than passion, designed to cement an Anglo-Spanish alliance and bolster Catholic power in Europe. Charles V was eager for the union, hoping to bind England to the Habsburg dynasty and strengthen his influence across the continent. Mary, devoutly Catholic and eager to restore her mother's faith to prominence in England, saw in Philip not only a strategic partner, but a pious man of royal blood who could share her vision, and perhaps her bed and heart. The reaction in England was mixed. Many feared foreign domination and the loss of English sovereignty. Parliament attempted to limit Philip's power within the realm, stipulating that he would hold no independent authority and that England would not be dragged into his foreign wars. Despite widespread unease, Mary pressed forward, driven by both her political mission and her personal hopes. She was captivated by the idea of being a wife and mother, of building a life with a husband who shared her ideals. She allowed herself to believe that Philip might come to love her. Their wedding took place in Winchester in July 1554. It was a grand affair, full of ceremony and political symbolism. But even then, signs of trouble were apparent. Philip spoke no English and relied on translators to communicate with his new subjects and even his wife. He was also 10 years younger than Mary. At 27, he was handsome, vigorous, and cosmopolitan, while she, though regal and resolute, was more reserved and less confident in social charm. Her appearance bore the signs of stress and age from her difficult life. She had suffered much, and it showed. For Philip, the marriage was a duty. He treated Mary with a cold politeness, fulfilling his role as a consort, but never opening his heart to her. Their time together was limited. He remained in England for little more than a year, often surrounded by his own Spanish advisors and maintaining an emotional distance from his wife. He did not share her romantic enthusiasm for the marriage, nor her desire for intimacy. Mary, however, clung desperately to the hope that love would grow between them. She lavished attention on Philip, spoke of him in adoring terms, and believed herself to be deeply in love. What followed was one of the most painful episodes in her life, the phantom pregnancies. In the spring of 1555, Mary began to show signs of pregnancy. Her abdomen swelled, her menstruation ceased, and she experienced morning sickness. The court rejoiced. Prayers were offered, preparations made, and the kingdom braced for the birth of a Catholic heir who would ensure the faith's future in England. Mary believed wholeheartedly that she was with child. She even went into seclusion to await the birth. But no child came. Months passed. Physicians were baffled. Eventually, it became clear that there was no baby. The humiliation was immense. Speculation and gossip ran wild. Had she been deceived? Was it a case of wishful thinking manifesting in physical symptoms? Or, as some Protestants whispered, was it a divine judgment against her cruel persecution of heretics? Whatever the cause, the emotional impact on Mary was devastating. She had pinned all her hopes on motherhood, not only for personal fulfillment, but to secure her legacy. When the pregnancy was revealed to be false, it shattered her spirit. To make matters worse, Philip left England shortly after, returning to the continent to attend to his own affairs. His departure confirmed Mary's deepest fears, that he did not love her, that she was merely a tool in a larger imperial game. Still, she refused to let go of him. She wrote letters, implored him to return, and even tried to involve England in Spain's wars in an effort to draw him back. Her obsession grew, even as Philip's indifference became more apparent. In 1557, Philip briefly returned, again more for political reasons than for affection. England was dragged into a war against France, and the disastrous loss of Calais, England's last continental possession, followed soon after. Philip offered no comfort, no reassurance. His visits were short, his attention elsewhere. Mary, however, still longed for him, still prayed for a child, still believed in a future that would never come. Her health began to deteriorate. Over the next year, she suffered from intense physical pain and emotional desolation. She likely had uterine or ovarian cancer, which would have caused symptoms similar to pregnancy and might explain the earlier phantom experiences. More phantom pregnancies followed, each more heartbreaking than the last. Her dreams of bearing an heir faded, and with them, her hopes for personal happiness. Her isolation deepened. She had alienated many of her subjects through her fervent Catholicism and harsh persecution of Protestants, which earned her the moniker Bloody Mary. Her religious policies, while deeply sincere, only added to her unpopularity. The people who had once celebrated her accession now feared her rule. She had little comfort in her court, and even less from her husband, whose attention turned increasingly toward his growing empire and his second wife, Elizabeth of Valois, whom he married after Mary's death. In 1558, Mary died at the age of 42, broken in body and spirit. Her final days were marked by illness, grief, and the awareness that she had failed to produce an heir or win her husband's affection. She was buried in Westminster Abbey, later joined in the same tomb by her half-sister and successor, Elizabeth I. The irony was bitter. In life, Elizabeth had been her rival. In death, they shared a grave. Mary Tudor's marriage to Philip of Spain was meant to bring unity, strength, and renewal to the Tudor dynasty. Instead, it brought sorrow, suspicion, and emotional devastation. Her story is not just one of political miscalculation, but of deeply human yearning, for love, for motherhood, for belonging. Unlike other Tudor tales filled with betrayal and bloodshed, Mary's is quieter, more inward, but no less tragic. She was a woman of sincere devotion, who gave her heart without reservation and received little in return. Mary died not as a triumphant queen, but as a sorrowful woman, unloved by the man she cherished and unable to fulfill the one dream that had sustained her: to bear a child and be remembered as the mother of a Catholic England. Her reign is often remembered for its failures, but her personal story is one of heartbreaking vulnerability. It is a poignant reminder that even monarchs wielding great power are not immune to the most profound human pain, that of loving without being loved back. Lady Jane Grey and Lord Guilford Dudley's story is a poignant chapter in Tudor history, marked by political ambition, youthful innocence, and tragic consequences. Their union, orchestrated by powerful families seeking to consolidate power, thrust them into the heart of a succession crisis that ultimately led to their untimely deaths. Born into nobility, Lady Jane Grey was the daughter of Henry Grey, Duke of Suffolk, and Lady Frances Brandon, herself the daughter of Mary Tudor, sister to Henry VIII. Jane was renowned for her intelligence and devout Protestant faith. Her upbringing was strict, emphasizing scholarly pursuits and religious devotion, shaping her into a young woman of remarkable intellect and piety. Lord Guilford Dudley, son of John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, was similarly positioned within the echelons of power. The Dudleys were influential, with Northumberland serving as the de facto ruler during the minority of King Edward VI. Guilford's marriage to Jane in May 1553 was a strategic alliance, designed to strengthen Northumberland's grip on the throne by uniting two powerful Protestant families. The political landscape at the time was fraught with uncertainty. King Edward VI, a staunch Protestant, was gravely ill and concerned about the succession. Fearing the return of Catholicism under his half-sister Mary, Edward drafted a devise for the succession, naming Jane as his heir. This move, heavily influenced by Northumberland, bypassed both Mary and Elizabeth, Edward's half-sisters. Upon Edward's death in July 1553, Jane was proclaimed queen. However, her reign lasted a mere 9 days. Mary Tudor, with significant popular support, claimed her rightful place as queen, leading to Jane and Guilford's imprisonment in the Tower of London. During their incarceration, both Jane and Guilford faced immense pressure to convert to Catholicism and acknowledge Mary's authority. Jane, steadfast in her beliefs, refused to renounce her Protestant faith. She engaged in theological debates and wrote letters expressing her convictions, including a poignant missive to her sister, Lady Catherine Grey, urging her to remain faithful. Guilford, too, remained imprisoned, and while less is known about his personal reflections, accounts suggest he sought solace in religion during his final days. The young couple's separation in the Tower underscored the personal toll of the political machinations that had ensnared them. Despite initial indications that Mary might spare their lives, a rebellion led by Sir Thomas Wyatt in early 1554 altered the Queen's stance. Fearing further uprisings and under pressure to assert her authority, Mary ordered the executions of Jane and Guilford. On February 12, 1554, Guilford was executed on Tower Hill. Jane, witnessing his body being returned to the Tower, reportedly declined to see him, fearing it would weaken her resolve. Later that day, Jane faced her own execution with composure, delivering a speech affirming her innocence and faith before being beheaded. The question of whether Jane and Guilford shared a genuine romantic bond remains a subject of historical debate. Their marriage, arranged for political expediency, offers little evidence of a deep personal connection. However, the shared adversity they faced and their mutual youth suggest a bond forged through shared experience, if not romantic love. Jane and Guilford were victims of the ambitions of those around them. Their tragic fate serves as a somber reminder of the perils of political intrigue and the human cost of power struggles. Their story continues to captivate historians and the public alike, symbolizing the innocence lost amidst the ruthless pursuit of authority. Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of King Henry VIII, was a young noblewoman whose brief tenure as queen ended in tragedy. Born around 1521, she was the daughter of Lord Edmund Howard and Joyce Culpeper, making her a cousin to Anne Boleyn, Henry's second wife. Raised in the household of the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, Catherine's early life was marked by a lack of supervision, leading to youthful indiscretions that would later resurface with dire consequences. In 1540, Henry VIII, then nearly 50 and seeking companionship after his annulment from Anne of Cleves, married the vivacious Catherine, who was in her late teens. Her charm and beauty captivated the aging king, and she quickly became a favorite at court. However, Catherine's past and present entanglements would soon unravel her position. Before her marriage, Catherine had engaged in a relationship with Francis Dereham, which some considered a pre-contract. More perilously, during her queenship, she developed an intimate association with Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the king's privy chamber. Their clandestine meetings, often facilitated by Lady Rochford and Boleyn's sister-in-law, became the subject of court gossip. A letter from Catherine to Culpeper, expressing deep affection, was discovered, serving as damning evidence of their liaison. In November 1541, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer informed Henry VIII of Catherine's indiscretions. The revelations devastated the king, who felt deeply betrayed. Catherine was arrested and confined to her chambers, while investigations proceeded. Culpeper and Dereham were tried and found guilty of treason. Culpeper was beheaded, and Dereham suffered the gruesome fate of being hanged, drawn, and quartered. Catherine's own execution followed on February 13, 1542. She met her end with dignity, requesting a block to practice laying her head upon before the execution. The tragic tale of Catherine Howard and Thomas Culpeper underscores the perilous nature of court life in Tudor England, where youthful indiscretions and passionate entanglements could lead to fatal outcomes. Their story remains a poignant reminder of the human cost of political and personal transgressions in a time of absolute monarchy. Mary Tudor, the younger sister of King Henry VIII, was born into a world where royal marriages were instruments of political strategy. In 1514, at the age of 18, she was wed to King Louis XII of France, a man over 30 years her senior. This union was orchestrated to strengthen ties between England and France. However, Mary had extracted a promise from her brother that, should she outlive Louis, she would be free to choose her next husband. Charles Brandon, the Duke of Suffolk, was a close friend of Henry VIII and had risen through the ranks due to his loyalty and charisma. Mary and Charles had known each other for years, and their mutual affection was evident. After Louis XII's death in January 1515, Henry VIII dispatched Charles to France to escort his widowed sister back to England. Despite Henry's explicit instructions not to propose marriage, Mary and Charles defied royal orders and married in secret in Paris on March 3, 1515. This act was considered treasonous, as marrying a royal princess without the king's consent was a grave offense. The news of their clandestine marriage reached Henry VIII, who was initially furious. However, his affection for both his sister and his friend tempered his response. With the intervention of Cardinal Wolsey, the couple was fined £24,000, a substantial sum at the time, and Mary surrendered her dowry and royal jewels. Their marriage was officially recognized in a ceremony at Greenwich Palace on May 13, 1515, attended by the king and his court. Mary and Charles's marriage was one of genuine affection, rarity among royal unions of the period. They had 4 children together, including Frances Brandon, who would become the mother of Lady Jane Grey. Despite their initial transgression, the couple maintained a relatively peaceful existence, residing at Westhorpe Hall in Suffolk. Mary remained a prominent figure at court, though her relationship with Henry VIII became strained during his efforts to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, a move Mary opposed. Mary Tudor died on June 25, 1533, at the age of 37. Her death deeply affected Charles Brandon, who had shared a profound bond with her. He later married Catherine Willoughby, a young heiress initially betrothed to his son. While this marriage was advantageous, it lacked the deep affection that characterized his union with Mary. The story of Mary Tudor and Charles Brandon stands out in Tudor history as a testament to love's triumph over political convention. Their willingness to risk everything for each other left an indelible mark on the era, illustrating that even in a world dominated by power and strategy, genuine affection could prevail. Across the tumultuous history of the Tudor dynasty, the stories of love and loss reveal profound truths about human nature, power, and the societal forces that shape personal lives. Despite their differences in circumstance, these tales are connected by common themes that speak to the cost of living and loving in an era dominated by political ambition, religious upheaval, and relentless surveillance. At the heart of these narratives lies the harsh reality that love was often a casualty of power struggles. The Tudors ruled a kingdom in constant flux, where dynastic succession and political alliances took precedence over personal happiness. Royal marriages were less about affection and more about securing alliances, producing heirs, and consolidating power. This instrumental view of love meant that the individuals involved, often women, had little agency in choosing their partners or expressing their desires. Their hearts became collateral damage in a larger Game of Thrones, where trust was scarce and betrayal frequent. Love itself was deeply entangled with the politics of the time. The Tudor court was a place where private feelings were scrutinized, rumors spread like wildfire, and the consequences of indiscretions could be deadly. The very act of loving could invite suspicion, jealousy, or accusations of treason. For figures like Boleyn or Catherine Howard, love outside the sanctioned bounds of marriage was not just scandalous but could, and did, lead to execution. In this environment, passion was as dangerous as it was intoxicating. Religious upheaval further complicated the terrain of love. The Reformation, initiated in England under Henry VIII, transformed not only the kingdom's spiritual life, but also the social and political order. Marriages were affected by shifting doctrines, annulments were wielded as political tools, and faith became a battleground for loyalty. For individuals caught in these shifts, love was often tested against the rigid frameworks of religious expectation, sometimes fracturing relationships or forcing heartbreaking choices. Reflecting on these stories from a modern perspective, we find enduring lessons about freedom, agency, and vulnerability. The Tudors' struggles highlight how love can flourish or falter, depending on the degrees of freedom allowed by society. The women and men in these narratives navigated a world where their choices were constrained by birth, duty, and fear. Yet within those confines, they sought moments of genuine connection, passion, and hope, demonstrating the resilience of the human spirit. These tales also reveal the vulnerabilities that accompany love in any era. Despite crowns, power, or privilege, the central figures endured heartbreak, loss, and betrayal just as acutely as anyone else. Their stories remind us that love is not a privilege of the powerful, but a fundamental human experience, fraught with risk and reward. For modern readers, the heartbreak and drama of Tudor love stories resonate because they reflect universal themes: desire and duty, freedom and constraint, hope and despair. They offer a window into the human costs behind historical events, transforming distant figures into relatable individuals. Moreover, they invite us to consider how far society has come in recognizing individual agency in matters of the heart and how much remains to be done. The legacy of Tudor love stories is their ability to humanize history, illustrating that behind the grand narratives of monarchy and empire lie deeply personal stories of love lost and found, dreams shattered and embraced. They remind us that love, in all its complexity, remains a powerful force that shapes lives across the ages.